Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining today's event all about EDI and integrating your supply chain with Dynamics GP. I'm Jason Gumpert from msdynamicsworld.com, and I am pleased to be here with our speaker today, Brian Lynch from Data Masons. As we get started, please do know that we do welcome your questions and input today. You can enter your questions at any time using the Q&A block you should see just to the right of the main presentation area. And I know Brian will be leaving time at the end of the main presentation period for some questions. So without any further delay, I am going to hand things off to Brian to get us started.
Excellent. Well, Jason, I definitely appreciate it, and welcome everyone who is attending here today. As noted, we're going to be covering EDI for your Dynamics GP environment. Just as a way of a brief introduction, I've personally been working with the GP community, actually going all the way back to the DOS days, so a little over 20 years. And so it's been my pleasure to work with Data Masons and our customers and partners as they try to meet some of the challenges related to EDI. So we've been doing EDI for 20 years as well, and with that, over 1,500 different customers that we've assisted. And so what I'd like to do here over our next hour or so is just present some of our findings, some things that you may want to be aware of, and definitely some opportunities as it relates to leveraging your Dynamics investment. So with that, knowing that we have a little bit of a broad audience here today, I did want to cover a little bit of EDI 101. We're going to cover some of the integration challenges that may be out there and some traditional approaches to those, and potentially recognizing, if you went down a certain path, some of the pains related to potentially the wrong approach. And then lastly, what we're going to do is just follow it up to how we have hopefully made the process much simpler, and then with that, time permitting, do a little bit of a demonstration. And again, do encourage everyone as we're going through, if you do have questions, just to ask those via the questions section, and we'll get those towards the end there. So EDI is really the notion of electronically trading typically key supply chain transactions. And so if you think of GP kind of in the center here, all of the different types of business entities that are outside of your four walls that you may need to trade with. Oftentimes, for instance, customers, third-party warehouses, suppliers, carriers, just to name a few. And if we look at something like a customer, the traditional purchase order, ship notification, invoices are definitely some of the core foundation. But the reality of today's environment is, for instance, in e-commerce, we need to make sure the pricing's correct, the stocking level's correct, that we're not in a backorder situation. And so oftentimes you may have, real-time inventory feeds. You may have forecast information. And so really the standard supports over 1,000 different transactions. The reality is, again, in the kind of the supply chain element, is there's probably about 60 or so that are probably more common. And so with these transactions, you're basically trading between, yourself and another party. And again, as they issue out, for instance, a ship notification or invoice, depending on the nature of the transaction, the other party is then, receiving those transactions. Now, the notion of EDI, electronic data interchange, really can mean different things to different people. Here in North America, the more common standard is what's called ANSI X12, and so off to the left here is an example of a purchase order. And so this is really codes that is meant to be a computer-to-computer transmission. Besides ANSI X12, there's EDIFACT, there's UCS, there's VIX. There's really quite a few different standards that are out there, potentially with your business partners. Off to the middle there, you'll also see XML. The promise of XML is that it's both human readable but also computer readable. Now it's a little bit more verbose, oftentimes about 10 times the amount of character, so high volume, that definitely can come into play. One of the other challenges is the notion of the standards themselves. So for instance, if we look at something like PO underscore number, as humans, we know that that equals the PO number. But what if my partner did PO pound sign or PO num? We, again, as humans would know that that is the same thing, but to the computer, it's a little bit more vague, and someone would have to say, hey, these three things all mean the same. Whereas with the standards, per se, there's one way to report that PO number. And then lastly, off to the right in the darker gray circle or box, here we have an example of a flat file, and so oftentimes this may be tab delimited, comma delimited as in this example, and so all three of these are really conveying a purchase order. It's just how they do it, the standards that exist, etc. And so having a platform that's capable of speaking to these standards and formats as well as others oftentimes is very critical. The other component to this is the rules that go around the fields and the rules themselves. So for instance, I oftentimes pick on Amazon or Walmart as one of the larger, for instance, consumer packaged goods out there. And so, for instance, Walmart takes 120 pages to describe, what a purchase order looks like, in their environment. They trade, I believe, about 18 different documents, and so all of a sudden, you've got several hundred, if not thousands of transaction documents that you really have to be keenly aware of because if not, unfortunately, there could be penalty fines and chargebacks, if you're not compliant with all of these rules. And so oftentimes, although EDI has been around for many, many years, having the expertise to deal with the integration, to deal with the trading partner compliance, because, a lot of organizations just don't have that kind of skill set in-house. So these are, again, things that you want to be mindful of and aware of. So with that, I thought it would be helpful to kind of explain some of the different types of EDI solutions out there. And if we look at the first one, kind of the notion of a web form, this can take place in different kind of situations. For instance, a vendor portal, such as Walmart's retail link, would definitely come to mind. This allows the supplier to at least electronically receive, for instance, purchase orders. As far as the end customer is concerned, they're still trading electronically between their own web portal and their own ERP system. The downside to this is it's really meant for low volume because a lot of times what will happen is these organizations recognize that, you're more prone to data entry mistakes. You may not be able to handle very large transaction volumes because, again, they recognize that you're probably rekeying these transactions into your ERP, versus the true computer-to-computer, goal of an integrated EDI program. So again, oftentimes, low partner count, low volume. The next column would be more a software as a service provider. This tends to be kind of a quote-unquote cloud website that you may log into. The value being that it's able to consolidate, multiple partners into the same user interface. So again, it does add value in regards to that area. A lot of times it is meant for lower volume, again, because of the high transaction fees per document. This may be cost prohibitive in large transaction volumes. So if you're doing several hundreds, definitely thousands of transactions a month, again, this can be not necessarily all the feature set, but also some of the costs per document. A lot of times these providers may not actually have their own integration, and so they may work with third-party solutions, and so as you get into a kind of a two-vendor model, some of the pros and cons that kind of goes with that approach. But again, works very effectively, if you have low volume, and again, want to kind of consolidate away from the individual partner web forms. Next, we get into traditional translation tools, and so this is where the GenTrans of the world, would basically say, "Hey, we can help you, format the message into an EDI syntax. In essence, we'll drop off a file. You're then responsible for the actual integration, or again, you're working with a third party to do this. Some of the prevalent, EDI providers from past, basically tried to bundle, software like a GenTran into their solution. The challenge with that, again, is it's a third party, not really designed for Dynamics, and so, cross-referencing, data validation, et cetera, that heavy lifting that's often needed, these tools just really do not have it. Which leads us into more of the managed solution, which I think is where Data Masons would more fit. This tends to be more a medium to high volume, kind of situation. Definitely one or more customers. Oftentimes, the more business partners that you have, the easier the business case. Here, this is a solution that is pre-built. Oftentimes will take care of the technical end of the trading partner map compliance components, for relatively low investment, versus obviously, staffing and other considerations. This allows you to be compliant with your business partners, but not necessarily taking on a large technical burden. So again, just some of the types of EDI solutions that are out there. Now, when it comes to GP integration, there's some things that I definitely would bring to the group's attention. And so if we look at, kind of business, data, and partners, under each of those, things such as business rule processing. Again, in GP world, for instance, with sales order processing, what order type are we going to use? Is there a certain batch ID that we need? By the way, we use advanced distribution. And so, how have all these things come into play? Manufacturing, for instance. And so the business rule processing, that is not only your specific version of GP, but also your specific business operations need to take into account. Unexpected scenarios that might happen. You're supposed to ship to a distribution center, but, the customer is out of stock, and so all of a sudden they want you to switch to a store, an end consumer, or all of a sudden you're maybe routing the fulfillment to a drop ship supplier, or needing to go to a third-party warehouses. And so how do you handle these various scenarios that might come up, because again these are critical in meeting the compliance obligations that you have. Scalability, not only in the sense of the transaction volume, but also in regards to just the number of documents that you may be processing. Over the years, definitely worked with lots of organizations who, for instance, maybe was used to shipping large distribution center orders. So, the truck came in, one day a week, basically loaded up the semi-truck and sent that off to the DC. The individual stores were then fulfilled. But now as you start to potentially, ship to the stores, whether it be a store replenishment program, or in a omni-channel e-commerce environment, where we're doing pickups at the store, again, these transaction volumes start to increase. You also then obviously have the end consumer shipments where, again, especially on, Black Friday and things that are coming up here relatively soon, it's not unheard of to really have very significant volume after some of these kind of promotional periods and overall holiday periods. So again, scalability becomes very, very mission critical. And then lastly, just some of the GP configurations and modifications that you've done. I know in working with many GP customers over the years, it's not uncommon to have 8 or 13 or so different ISV solutions. You got e-commerce. Sometimes you have check printing. Different things. Barcoding or WMS, some of these things have an impact to how your EDI needs to flow, and so taking those kind of things into account. Now, related to data itself, we have the notion of cross-referencing, and so your part number to their part number, unit of measure conversion, whose pricing takes precedence, their store distribution center code and address to how you physically have set it up inside of GP's addressing system. All of these things become very critical in the notion of their data versus your data in the cross-references that need to occur. You also get into the notion of turnaround data. And so classic examples of this might be on an incoming sales order, the notion of, what item sequence did the line items appear. GP, like most ERP systems, does not track, the reported sequence number by the business partner. And so a lot of times to be compliant, folks have to modify their GP system to track this information. Department numbers, vendor numbers, as you get into things, for instance, maybe at a header level. And so being able to handle this turnaround data, again, potentially via customizations can become a challenge. Various duplicate data entry. Here we've seen scenarios where, an order may have come in, via EDI, but then also maybe a change order or, a copy of that order was faxed in or emailed in, and so just things that needs to occur there. But also in regards to the actual fulfillment details in the outbound processing, every time that we have to have an operator touch that transaction or one of its corresponding transactions, it just adds time, money, and introduces the possibility of errors into the process. And then just unexpected data issues itself. We've definitely seen where, the customer just sent a bad part number, sent a price of 0 when obviously, we're not going to give it to them for free. Various things that might occur in the transaction or in the data itself that, again, your EDI integration, like a human, needs to be aware of what's correct and what is acceptable and error out, if there is an unexpected data issue that arises. Now, within the partners themselves, if you look at, for instance, AR Customer Master or Accounts Payable, there's really not a screen in the GP system, like most ERP systems, that says, hey, this is an EDI business partner. Here are the transactions that they need to trade with. By the way, here's the versions of EDI and the formats that they need to do, the communication method that I'm going to use, et cetera, et cetera. And so all of this type of information needs to be set up and handled so that we can EDI enable those particular business partners. So with some of those challenges, again, there's various approaches that are out in the market, again, helping some other organizations. We thought it would be helpful to kind of recognize some of the issues that can occur. One of which is just that, GP, the upgrade process is impacted, adds more expense. And for instance, we have GP 2018, coming out here next month. We're seeing Microsoft continue to release more and more functionality at a quicker and quicker pace. And so, being mindful of, upgrades is very, very critical. EDI support is lacking or split among multiple partners. Unfortunately, I do talk with folks quite often where, they had a great EDI solution in the beginning, a lot of consolidation, within the market, and now all of a sudden, that leadership has changed, so not quite getting the support that's needed. This is leading to chargebacks, taking longer to onboard new business partners. A lot of times for EDI, this is the lifeblood of, for instance, getting transactions from your customers or getting those fulfilled down to your 3PL, or getting the orders drop shipped or the materials needed from vendors and suppliers. And so EDI becomes a very, 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 very critical application for many businesses. And so if you're not getting the support, again, this can be pretty damaging. The other thing is you get into this notion of chargebacks and transaction fees. And so transaction fees can be, the cost per document or the amount of monthly spend from your EDI provider. And again, as we hear about the notion of cloud, this can often be kind of misleading that, hey, in order to outsource, that I do need to go to kind of a per transaction model. And that's just unfortunately not the case. And then you get into the notion of chargebacks, and so this is really penalty fines for non-compliance. Everything from, the ASN did not go out correctly or was timely to other factors. And unfortunately, I've seen scenarios where you may have, $25 a box, and thus shipping multiple pallets can, really eat up into the profits of many, many businesses. And so something that, again, has to be managed and dealt with. Automation is not optimal, and so this is really the notion that, do you have to actually touch the transactions? Can you simply let it scheduled? And again, the business rules that need to be followed. Now, the data itself, again, as we talked about, there's the traditional integrated ANSI EDI formats. You have EDIFACT, you have Tradecoms. There's really quite a few standards globally, but not all of your business partners may support, those standards. And so, hey, they are capable of doing XML, or they are capable of doing flat files. And so having a solution that can handle, all of these different data types is very critical. Tracking the turnaround data, as we talked about, there's various fields of information that, for instance, might be coming over on a purchase order that GP natively doesn't store. And so are you taking up, the limited number of standard user-defined fields? Are you modifying with extender? All of these things become, very important in regards to how the EDI system needs to interact. And then the other thing that I see quite often is just the partner onboarding takes a long time. And so, really that process, is never a plug-and-play exercise, but, really should be measured in days to weeks at best. So when you're getting into, really months and longer, oftentimes there's definitely some issues at play there. And so, being able to very quickly, accurately, and cost-effectively onboard new partners becomes very important as you continue to grow your business. And then one other sign that, again, that you may be dealing with the wrong model is just poor vendor scorecarding. And again, as you get chargebacks, late shipments, various things that might occur. And really this can, manifest itself in different symptoms. For instance, you've missed the ship window, and maybe that's because, the orders took longer to get in or to get in correctly, so that your warehouse had the time to properly execute the pick, pack, ship process. So vendor scorecarding is obviously very critical in keeping that customer, and more importantly, hopefully growing the business with that customer. And again, as we talked about, chargebacks and penalty fines. So, how does Data Masons, make it simple, and, kind of what we've done? And so, Microsoft has certified our solution. We've worked with hundreds of GP customers over the years. And for us, some of the things that are very important is, we're not just providing a tool set. There's really a dedicated level of expertise that comes along with our solution. Whether that's, doing an outsourced mapping, or whether or not you're even using our mapping tool. We really need to have a single source provider that can handle all aspects of the overall EDI program. So very critical. We're also very big believers of not modifying, the GP and the overall ERP system. And so things like turnaround data, as you'll see here in a little bit, we're actually storing the original transaction and can reference that information in our comparisons for business rule automation, but also for the notion of turnaround data, so that we can get that customer the data that they need to see on the way back out. And for us, automation and scalability is very, very critical. And so if I had 1,000 orders come in this morning and number 37 had an invalid item or an invalid price, getting all of those transactions into sales order processing, except for the one that had the exception, And then for those that did have exceptions, emailing off to the appropriate, for instance, customer service representative representing, and understanding things like, hey, Walmart is managed by Brian, and Amazon is managed by Heather. Being able to direct and have some smarts about the types of exceptions and who needs to actually fix those become very, very important. And for us, having the expertise beyond those core transactions, so we actually support 65 different integrated transactions, out of the box, with GP, going back all the way to version 9 into the most current supported version with FYI, just weeks away here for support with GP 2018. And then really last, just a true partner, we definitely appreciate that there's other EDI companies out there. What sets us apart is we're not trying to be all things to all people. We get up each and every day focused on EDI, focused on the Dynamics community, expertise within the GP platform, because again, all of these things need to kind of come together. The other thing, too, very exciting is over the last few years, seeing not only the notion of, outsourced mapping compliance, but really this notion of managed services. And that's a term that really can mean different things to different people. What we mean by that is we're actually running the EDI integration software for you. We're communicating with your business partners. We're handling the exceptions. It's a truly hands-off kind of approach. Your team gets involved, when you're onboarding new partners or you're dealing with something that, again, is more GP related, such as master data, pricing, etc. So again, just a true partner that's flexible in how we work with you, all delivered with a truly scalable, platform. So with that, how does this all work? And so we've talked about kind of the outside world off to the left here. And so we have entities such as customers and 3PLs, suppliers, etc. So let's take, for instance, a customer sales order. That comes in represented by the blue any format kind of document here. Happens to be an ANSI X12 message, and it happens to be communicated with a direct communication. So FTP, AS2, some of the technologies there. But you also, for instance, maybe have value-added networks. Vantage Point, represented here in the middle, is basically playing traffic cop in an automated fashion to connect out to all of these partners in their various forms of communication, for the various documents that they process. And so when we get that incoming sales order, one of the first things that we're going to do is we're going to create a copy of it and take a copy of the transaction and convert it into an XML representation. And so we have a library of over thousands of partners that are pre-built that basically we can take the maps and convert to the Data Mason standard. Once we have done that, we can go through the various business rules that GP requires, additional rules that you may have overlaid on top of that, and go through the notion of, again, my part number to their part number, their address codes to my address codes. Hey, this one EDI sales order, are we actually ending up with one sales order inside a GP, or do we have to split it up or go through certain logic tree, kind of decision points? But at some point, once we've done all of that heavy lifting, we're going to use GP's API, which is called eConnect, to physically create the transaction as if we had keyed it in. Again, everything that we've kind of described on the screen, typically handled in a scheduled, automated fashion. And so sales orders are simply showing up inside a GP, allowing me to now execute our pick, pack, ship process without any manual involvement. If there was manual involvement, again, it's typically dealing more with the exceptions. And so we use GP to execute the pick, pack, and ship. And so we may need to send out outbound ship notifications or outbound invoices. Here we're going to use SQL views to pull or read the information out of the system. Now we are capable of using web services as well, but we pull these transactions into our system, in essence reverse the process. What format does this particular customer need? What rules do they need that that maybe were different than the last invoice. And then we're going to send that off back to the partner in their method of communication, in their particular format. Also, if it's EDI, looking for things like the functional acknowledgement, which is kind of like EDI's read receipt, letting us know the transactions had flowed, back and forth. So with that, definitely out on our website, we have great video case studies, written case studies, other information to kind of help you through kind of the EDI process. One of those is from our customer Thirsty Stone, and so they were a conversion from a different system, and so Jim goes on to explain just some of the values that they've seen in converting over the years, with the Data Masons platform. Out at Summit, I had the opportunity to co-present with one of our customers, and there's a picture of Lee up in the top left there. They've been a proud member of GPUG since 2014, based in Tampa, Florida. And for them, EDI was very, very important and very critical. They had been going through quite a few different brand expansions, and acquisitions and different things that were occurring. And so while at Summit and at the GP session, Lee shared a little bit of their story, and I'd like to kind of share a little bit of that with you here today. And so these guys make, these great large printers, and you can see some of the materials kind of there that go off. And so, leading supplier of the wide format print media. And so for them, house brands, OEMs, private labels, just different manufacturers and distributors that they work with truly on a global level. And so, with that, when you think about, EDI, they are really trading with multiple different entity types, coordinating with, some of their locations, kind of going throughout, the North America here. And so what Lee was sharing with us is, that they had multiple customers live. Over half of their volume really was all coming through EDI. And so for them, they were actively expanding additional, EDI customer relationships. They had started to trade with vendors, looking to automate some additional documents such as incoming 856 advanced ship notices and invoices, reviewing the logistics side. And so really trying to leverage EDI to its fullest. And I thought his story, his situation was very helpful because, again, they had converted from a different system. Again, was starting to expand in regards to who they were trading with in different areas out there. So Lee was grateful enough to share that story with us. He's done a little bit of video information out on our website. Has made himself available for speaking with potential customers. And so again, just wanted to share a little bit of his story with the audience here today. Again, because I do think that they represent what GP is capable of doing, and again, what a good integrated EDI system can do to kind of help automate some of these key supply chain requirements. The other thing he had brought to the group's attention was it didn't require a GP user license, again, given the technologies that we were using, and so, some significant savings there. The level of support that was needed, the documents that were supported, the formats, these were all things that, as he compared, some of the other solutions on the market, ultimately what led him to partner with Data Masons. So with our time remaining here, I'm going to go through a little bit of a demonstration. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and sign into GP here. And again, the reality of a good integrated EDI program is you don't really need to touch it. And so in the case of sales orders, here we've got sales transaction entry, we've got the customer filled out, we've got our line items, we have our batch IDs, pricing, various things that may occur. And so what we're going to do is we're going to kind of go under the covers a little bit and see how the Data Mason's Vantage Point product helps us to be compliant and automate the EDI process. And so with that, what I'm going to do is go ahead and sign in to Vantage Point. Now, Vantage Point is somewhat like a black box, meaning that, every 5 minutes, once an hour, you're telling the system, go out and go look for these transactions, run through the business rules, automate the process. But to take you under the covers a little bit, and show you what's going on, you'll see here that we're greeted by these interactive tiles. And so in my demonstration environment, I happen to have 300 critical alerts. The reality of a production environment is this is typically 0. The mere fact that you have 1 or more, oftentimes signals an actionable item that oftentimes was precursored by an email or a text message to the appropriate person. Now, in this particular case, these all happen to be just overdue transactions because I'm not really trading with a live production partner, and so unfortunately nothing is actually getting acknowledged there. But, we talked about the fact that we support, the 60-plus transactions to and from GP. And I can go through those individual screens to do that if I were even to log into the system. But a lot of times when we first set up the environment, what's actually happening is we're going to say, hey, we've just installed Vantage Point. Where is my GP server located? And by the way, what version are we running? This solution, the same software, works all the way back to version 10. And again, historically speaking, we've had day 1 support of major releases and anticipate that, here in December with GP 2018. But we're going to indicate, where's our server, what's our version, what's our companies within the system. And then what we're going to do is we're going to then set up our trading partners. And so under our trading partners, we're going to go through the notion of what documents do we support, what method of communication, the mere fact that this is a customer. And we also have drop-down checkbox type configurations that control the behavior of how this customer is going to work in your particular environment. The reality is how customer 1 integrates might be different than how customer 2 integrates. How you integrated is different than my last GP customer. And so these configuration options allow us to kind of modify the behavior without having to program anything. Now, by doing that, we're also able to take advantage of, GP's, item cross-reference data so that I don't have to maintain that in multiple places. That becomes very critical, depending on how many items that you're managing, how often that you're changing item data, etc. But we're going to do that for addresses, carriers, warehouses, things along those lines. Now, by doing that, I could, again, go through the notion of manually processing. Again, most of my customers use my automation system that we call Scheduler up here to the right, where I'm going to lay out, hey, every 5 minutes I'm checking for new orders. Hey, twice a day I'm pulling invoices out. Every 5 minutes, every 10 minutes, I'm going out and doing ASNs. By the way, what I do for Amazon is a little bit different than what I do for Walmart. What I do for my U.S. operations is a little bit different than what I do for my international operations. So you have all that granularity of support. Now, if I were to, quote-unquote, click the buttons, and I will apologize, I'm logged in as an administrator, so I literally have everything turned on, but the notion of a purchase order, a sales order, an invoice, the order to cash kind of cycle that I have off to the left, all of these groupings, the titles, etc., in of itself is a configuration. The fact that this is blue, the fact that this has, 8 or 9 boxes in it, that's all tailored to my specific environment. And so if I think about what a purchase order cycle might look like, receive the purchase order, acknowledge the purchase order, deal with order changes, et cetera, not every single business goes through those cycles. And so oftentimes in a role-based system, you may only have a few entries in this window if you're even going into it at all. But let's kind of walk through here a little bit of what's actually happening. So I actually went ahead and had the system process a live transaction. And so what we're going to do is look at an order that I created a little bit earlier here today. And I'm going to simply right-click on this, and the reality is that when, in this case, Target sent me a sales order, this came over as raw EDI, as we were showing in the PowerPoint. Now, unfortunately, doing this for as many years as I have, I can unfortunately read this, but the reality is that you shouldn't have to. And so, by converting this to XML, for instance, I can look at more of a traditional header line item view. Or I can go and look at a human-readable report that maybe would have automatically been sent off via PDF if I wanted to actually read that transaction beforehand. But a lot of times, again, being able to actually store that transaction with all of its associated data points. And so here's an XML representation, of all of the various records and fields. And so that notion of turnaround data, here we now have all of the information stored that we can use that later on. We've got the raw EDI code so that we know what all these pieces mean. And so if I do need to pull these out, I do have that. But all of what I just showed you inside of Vantage Point is happening behind the scenes in an automated fashion. What's really happening, as far as most users are concerned, is they're coming into sales transaction entry, through the window itself like I'm doing here, or they're using SmartList, and they're just saying, hey, just go show me the transactions that I actually have, for the actual day there. And so that really kind of demonstrates for most businesses, kind of how they're utilizing EDI. Again, here's the transaction from here, the 17th, automatically cross-referencing our part number to their part number, dealing with, fulfillment details, getting into the pricing information, filling out, what warehouse is going to fulfill this order, if we're linked with manufacturing, filling out user-defined fields, various things that, again, would actually happen if we were keying this order in. Now, at this point, again, the system has been automated, so the order's in the system. We can execute pick, pack, and ship. At some point, we're going to create our outbound advanced ship notices. We may have detailed purchase order acknowledgements, and at some point, we're going to have invoicing. And so as I kind of go through those processes, I would transfer that, for instance, off to an invoice. EDI is detecting that event, oftentimes then automatically sending those transactions off to the various business partners. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of a taste of, how other GP users are automating, their EDI interactions, using the Microsoft certified Vantage Point product, and really the Data Mason's expertise in keeping up in compliance, with the various partner obligations that are out there, having someone at the end of the line if you do need help. And so with that, Jason, I'm going to go ahead and open it up to see by chance if we've got any questions from the audience.
All right, thank you, Brian. Yeah, so if you have questions, this is the time to enter them into the Q&A block. We have a couple that have come in, so we'll start going through them now. So Brian, the first question that came in, I'm not doing EDI today, don't have the resources to handle it. Can Data Masons help with day-to-day EDI operations?
Yeah, absolutely. And we're, again, seeing that, more and more. And so in that scenario, you've just landed a brand new customer. They need you to do EDI. And so with our team, we have the capability of deploying our EDI solution, oftentimes doing remote implementation to get you all compliant with the initial solution. And they're going on under managed services, actually running the day-to-day operation, coordinating with your trading partners, handling the communications, any MAP compliance updates, meaning that Walmart changed their rules, etc. Our team is managing that for you. So we offer that both under a subscription model as well as a perpetual license model. So pretty flexible in how we work with you.
Okay, someone would like to know if you have had any customers in the retail grocery industry.
Yeah, this is actually a pretty significant industry, and so as you get into, for instance, the various divisions of Kroger's, you get into the Cisco's of the world. So this is an industry that very much is automating some of their compliance documents. So great case studies that we have out there, and would love to talk with you further.
All right. Do you have a list of master records and transaction types that you integrate to GP?
Yeah, we do. So like I said, we have about 65 that we support. You can actually find this out on our website, as well as I have my contact information here to save you a little bit of search. Feel free to email me, and I'd be more than happy to send you the direct link to that. But yes, we do have not only the list of transactions, we also have a list, it's a partial list of some of the business partners that we support. So for instance, that earlier question of the grocery industry, you'd find pretty much any of the large national accounts out in that pre-built library.
Okay, let me make a final call for questions here. I have one more lined up, and if any others come in, we'll get to them too. So my company is evaluating Dynamics 365 for operations. Will VantagePoint work for both GP and 365?
Sure, that's a great question, and we do see this, where folks evaluate. GP is a great ERP system. Matter of fact, I was just talking earlier. I think now 2018 represents something like version 15 or version 16. So it is a maturing product, and we are seeing folks, want to leverage that investment that they've made with Microsoft and move towards, whether NAV or 365. Again, for data masons, we focus on Dynamics. We are certified for all of the Microsoft ERP platforms, so GP, NAV, AX, as well as Dynamics 365. So everything that I've shown you here, the menus are context sensitive, and so would dynamically change to those that are appropriate, for the specific Dynamics ERP. But again, it's the same code set, the same license. So should you make that migration, we'd move along with you. So yes.
All right, excellent. The only other question I'm seeing right now is just asking about access to the recording. We have recorded today's event, and we will be sharing it with you so that you can share that with others in your company. Great question, and thanks for asking on that. Well, Brian, I think we are through the questions, so we can probably begin wrapping up. Any other closing information?
Well, again, just thank you for attending today's session. If you do have any additional questions or thought, again, my information is there on the screen, as well as we do have some additional webinars and materials out on our website. I encourage you to go visit that. Thank you for taking the time here today, and Jason, thank you for having me.
Well, Brian, as always, it's a pleasure, and thanks to everyone in the audience, too, for your attention and your questions. And with that, we will conclude today's event. Have a great day, everybody.